This is the Crimson Corner with Bill Riley.
Walks it into the end zone for a Utah touchdown.
Your source for the best insight on everything happening in and around Utah athletics. Now, here's the host of the Crimson Corner, the voice of the Utes, Bill Riley.
Welcome in to another edition of the Crimson Corner podcast. I'm Bill Riley, the play-by-play voice of the University of Utah and host of this very podcast, the Crimson Corner, episode number 6 in 2026. So glad to be with you, and so glad that our friends at Advanced Window Products are on board. They are the title sponsor. They bring you this podcast each and every week. If you live in the state of Utah and you need great windows for your home, save a little energy, save a little heat, save a little cool in the summertime, well, Advanced Window Products, that's Nate Orchard's company, can help you out. They're great partners of ours here at the Crimson Corner, and we're glad to have them on board as we do another podcast here in mid-February of 2026. It's weird enough that it's 2026. Hard to believe we're a month and a half into the year, but here's where we are. Still a lot happening here with Utah athletics and on the Hill. We're going to talk some Utah football on this one. I don't know if you caught last week's episode with Joe DeRazio. He's the new general manager for Utah football. I just really enjoyed talking to Joe last week, and I've just got some follow-up thoughts on that podcast. If you missed it, go back and listen to when you're done with this one. Don't do it right now, but go back and listen to last week's podcast, because I just thought it gave some great insight into kind of the direction that Morgan Scalley is beginning to steer his program now with Utah football, and really the direction you need to go in college football and big-time collegiate athletics today. So I'm going to give you some thoughts, some follow-up thoughts on my conversation last week with Joe DeRazio. I'm going to give you some keys to winning the Big 12 Conference this year in football. We're going to talk football probably on every podcast just because it drives the bus, and that's probably what Utah fans love to talk most about. And I love college football, and it's frankly become a 365-day-a-year thing you could talk about. So I don't think, despite what everybody around the country and even around the Big 12 Conference have a lot of questions about this Utah football team, I don't have as many questions. And I think Utah's right there and are in good position to win the Big 12. Are they the favorite? Well, that you could discuss that. But I'm going to give you some keys to winning the Big 12 in 2026 for Morgan Scalley and Utah football. And over the next couple of months, through the spring football and more, I'm going to kind of give you some under-the-radar important players for 2026 as well. I'll give you my first today on the program. We'll talk some Running Utes basketball today. Johnnie Bryant is going to come by. Special guest today. Former Utah guard. You have to be kind of an old head like me to remember when Johnny played here. He came right after Andrew Bogut and right before Larry Kristoviak. His tenure at Utah was the early 2000s. Johnny, of course, is one of the really good guys, and I think he gets forgotten a little bit just because some of the teams he played on weren't quite to the standard they were before or after. But Johnny's great. He's a great Ute, and his story is so good. Of course, many of you know him now as an NBA assistant coach. He's the associate head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Before that, he was the associate head coach of the New York Knickerbockers. And before that, he was on the Jazz staff for about 7 years. So we're going to talk to Johnnie Bryant on the program today. Then we'll have some news and notes, and we've got some questions that you guys, a couple of some listener questions and comments that we'll get to today. By the way, as always, if you ever want to interact with me, shoot me an email, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. That's briley@huntsman.utah.edu. If you've got a question, if you've got a suggestion, if you've got a comment, send them to me, and I'll either respond to you off air or I'll read them on air, or maybe we'll do both. So we'll get to some of those today on the program. Big thank you to my buddy Nick Bowlerjack, who's producing this program as always, and thanks to you guys for making us part of your week. I think at some point Bowler and I might do this multiple times a week, but we're kind of in a good rhythm now of doing it once a week. Maybe we step things up during football season, do an early week and late week podcast because there's so much to talk about. But for now, we're going to kind of keep this early, late week rhythm. This week's pod dropping early in the week, just a heads up to you. If you're looking forward at about this time next week, it's going to drop a little bit later in the week next week because of some travel issues I'm going to have with basketball, but we will get you one up and going coming up next week. So Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in and listening. And if you get a chance, rate and review us and give us a good thumbs up or a 5-star because we love that stuff too. And share it with your friends too because, yeah, we talk a ton of Utah athletics, hence the Crimson Corner thing, but we'll talk a lot of football and Big 12 stuff and big picture collegiate athletic stuff as well on this podcast. So share it with your friends. Sharing is caring, as my good friend Gordy Chiesa likes to say. So share and rate and review highly if you so choose to do so. All right, a little Utah football stuff to begin things today. Like I said at the beginning, we talked last week to Joe DeRazio, the new general manager for Utah football, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the interview with Joe. There was I got good feedback from you guys. A lot of people heard it. It was the first time to kind of hear him publicly. He'll probably be making the rounds over the next couple of weeks talking to different outlets, but it was good to catch Joe early on. And just some things that stuck out to me about the conversation with Joe from last week. Number one, I love the fact that he and Morgan Scalley have a close relationship that has spanned a long time. Joe, if you're not familiar and you didn't listen to the podcast last week, was a graduate assistant on the staff in 2012, right after Utah joined the Pac-12 Conference. And he and Morgan Scalley became very good friends for that year that Joe was here. And they have continued that relationship moving forward. And it's been great. They've stayed in touch. They talk on a regular basis. So I kind of asked Joe about this. Was this something that was always planned? And Joe said, no, not necessarily. But Morgan and I have become good friends, and if the chance ever arose to work together, we wanted to do that. So I think when you've got a head coach, a.k.a. CEO of a program, because that's what a head coach is now, Morgan's now the CEO of Utah football, the guy that you've got to work most closely with in those aspects is your general manager. And especially a guy like Joe DeRazio, who's providing analytic help for you, but he's also really integral in building your roster and helping you build your roster. So the fact they have a long and close relationship, I think just bodes very, very well. They hit the ground running. They don't need to get to know each other. Second thing I really loved, when you listen to Joe talk, his desire to be back here at the University of Utah, you could feel it. You could hear it in his voice. And the fact that he's got a vision for how he sees Utah football and how Utah football could continue to be great in this new era of college football, that made me feel really good about things. His knowledge of Utah football culture helps. He doesn't have to come in and learn it because he lived it for a year, and he's remained close to that. And now you're joining that Utah football culture with data and analytics to continue to find the right players to keep Utah nationally and Big 12 competitive. Joe said it last week, and we know this. Utah's never going to be Oregon or Ohio State landing 7, 8, 9, 10 5-star guys in a recruiting class. But they're going to land the occasional Kelvin Obat and grab a guy like that. But what Joe and his background give you with data and analytics and his football background as a player and a coach is being able to find the right players that fit in and remain competitive. You look at Indiana and the success that they had this past 2 years. It wasn't built on the back of 5-star guys. It was built on the back of guys that Kirk Cignetti knew fit what he wanted to do. They were great. Let's not kid ourselves. Those were good football players. You don't win a national championship without good football players. But again, falling in love with the star system is not what you need to do. What you need to do is be able to look and evaluate and project forward. And when you're grabbing guys that haven't come in as freshmen, how do they fit and fit immediately? And I think that's a background that Joe's going to have. I like his ties with the NFL, too. He hasn't spent his entire collegiate career, his coaching career, or his football career in college athletics. He spent a couple of seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs and Andy Reid. He spent a couple of seasons with the Philadelphia Eagles, won a Super Bowl in his time there. So that helps because, again, the college model is becoming more and more like the pro model now. And the more experience you have at that level is going to help you. And finally, he gives Utah something they haven't ever had. Someone focused 24/7, 365 days a year on roster and talent acquisition. That is the job of the general manager. It's always looking at your roster and seeing how you can make it better. Today, tomorrow, into next year. And to have something like that and to have somebody with Joe DeRazio's skill set really helps Utah football. So I really enjoy it, and he was a really good guy too, and he was easy to talk to, and I think Utah fans, the more you hear from him and the more you see some of the fruits of his labors working with Morgan and the coaching staff, I think you're going to really appreciate what DeRazio brings here. And like I said, if you didn't give it a listen last week, go back and give it a listen and see what you think. And again, give me a comment afterwards if you would like to. All right, a couple of more things on Utah football. I've read so many off-season, way too early think pieces kind of highlighting the fact that it's Texas Tech's conference and world, and everybody else is just living in it. And I would say Texas Tech, what they did last year was very impressive. And what they did last year was very deserving of all the accolades that they got. They spent money, a lot of money, and they spent it well. They won the league, and they got to the college football playoff. However, they weren't without holes. They got bounced in the first round of the college football playoff, their first game of the college football playoff. So what I'm telling you is I don't think there is this wide, huge gap between Texas Tech and everybody else. Same thing with BYU. I've seen BYU tabbed as a top 9 to 12 team by a lot of preseason polls, and I think BYU and Kalani Sitake have done some really nice things in Provo. But to be very fair, Utah they were their own worst enemy in that game last year. They just simply were. The difference between Utah and BYU on the football field is not great. It's a possession or a play one way or another. I really do believe that Utah and BYU and Texas Tech are probably the best 3 teams right now in the Big 12 Conference. I think ASU probably is in that conversation as well, but they dipped a bit last year. They lost their starting quarterback, and now they're going to try to fill in with the guy that doesn't have a huge collegiate football resume. I like Kenny Dillingham a lot. I do. I think he's a fantastic coach. But he had one really, really good year, and that was it. So I want to see if they can bounce back this year. But my point here is, and it doesn't really have as much to do about these other schools, Utah wasn't far off in 2025 from winning the Big 12 Conference. They had a bad fourth quarter against Texas Tech here. A lot of that had to do with the fact that Devin Dampier was injured, and they just simply couldn't move the football or do anything offensively. It was a little like the Super Bowl you may have watched the other day. The New England defense kept them in that game as long as they humanly and possibly could, but then the offense just didn't do enough. And in the BYU game, they were kind of self-inflicted. Anyway, my point is, I think Utah's right in the mix this year. I do. I think missing Tech and ASU in the regular season this year is big. And I think having BYU at home this year is big. I expect both Tech and BYU to be good again this year. But I'm not sure if they'll be as good as they were a year ago. Brendan Swarsby's the new quarterback at Texas Tech. Utah had their way with Brendan Swarsby last year. They made him look very pedestrian when he played for Cincinnati, and he came in as an all-world quarterback. So we'll see how it goes. 3 things I think are very key if Utah wants it to have a legitimate chance to win the Big 12. Devin Dampier must take the next step as a passer, and he's got to remain healthy. Devin Dampier was a solid passer and an excellent field general a year ago. But if Utah wants to kind of take that next level up with their offense, we know Utah can run the football. Utah's always been able to run the football. Wayshawn Parker, the young man from San Jose State, Chavez, and Daniel Bray will make a nice 1-2-3 punch. I think the offensive line should be good. But Devin Dampier, if Utah wants to win a Big 12 conference and get to the college football playoff, I think he's got to stay healthy, and that goes without saying, though having Bird Ficklin as a backup quarterback and another year under his belt will be helpful. But he's got to take that next step as a passer. Second thing, offensive line, it's got to be good. No, it's not going to be probably initially as good as last year's unit. Why? Because last year's unit had 5 starters and 2 NFL first-round draft picks. But that's okay. Utah offensive line is good. That will be just fine. But that's something that Jordan Gross and Kevin McGivern have to work on this spring because there's a lot of moving pieces with that offensive line. There's not a returning guy coming back. Though there's a few guys that played quite a bit of football over the years for Utah. And then the third thing I would say, if Utah wants to win the Big 12 next year, and we're just talking about big picture things right now. We're way too far out to be breaking things down individually. We don't know what the game's going to look like yet. But who are the defensive playmakers? Who are the defensive playmakers for Utah? Good teams always have them. If you looked a year ago at the two teams that played for the Big 12 championship, BYU had two playmaking linebackers. Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasker were studs. They made play after play after play. If you looked at Texas Tech, they had them all over the place. David Bailey at defensive end, Romello Height at the other defensive end, Jacob Rodriguez at linebacker, the Wisniewski kid at safety. They had playmakers all over the place. So who are Utah's defensive playmakers? Is it Jackson Benny? Might be. He was pretty good. Is it Jonnu Hall? Might be. Is it Scooby Davis? Is it Cash Dillon? Who are the defensive playmakers? Because, again, you can't lay everything on the offense. You've got to be able to create sudden change and big plays. So we'll watch some of that stuff as well. But, again, to reiterate my point, I don't think the Big 12 is as decidedly Texas Tech or BYU as a lot of people think right now. I think those teams will be right in the conversation again. But to be very fair, I don't think Utah is very far, if at all, behind those two programs heading into this year. But we'll see. Season's still a long way away. On the next several podcasts over the next several months, as we talk some Utah football into spring football, I'm going to give you kind of an under-the-radar player. It's always easy to say Wayshawn Parker or Devin Dampier or Jackson Benny. But I'm going to give you kind of an under-the-radar player that's going to have a big impact on what Utah's success looks like coming up this year. And my under-the-radar player number one for Utah football this year, a guy that I think could have a big, big role on this team, is Rabbit Evans. If you remember a year ago, Rabbit Evans came out of fall camp as one of the two starting safeties for the University of Utah. It was he and Teo Johnson that were starters in the secondary. Rabbit Evans bulked up, added about 15 pounds to his frame to where he was when he came in 2024 from Blinn Junior College. And he was slated to play a big role. Played in the first couple of games and then got injured, and his season was done. Well, I think Rabbit Evans, in a secondary that doesn't have a ton of experience in it, you've got Scooby Davis at corner and a lot of questions. You've got Jackson Benny, but we're not sure where Jackson's going to line up quite yet. Is he a safety? Is he a nickel? I think probably nickel is his best position. But if he's a safety, he's back there with Evans. But I think Rabbit Evans, in his third year in this program, could be a real anchor on the back end for Morgan Scalley and Colton Swan. He knows the defense. He had a fantastic finish to 2024. That's why they were so high on him a year ago, heading into 25. But again, that season-ending injury early derailed the season. So just keep an eye, file it away. He doesn't have the name recognition of some of those other guys that I mentioned. But I think Rabbit Evans could be a real key to the Utah defense coming up this year and what they're able to do in 2026. All right, enough with the Utah football for now. We're into basketball season. Coming up on the other side, we're going to talk a little Utah basketball and just life and basketball in general with a guy that was a great Ute in the early 2000s, and he is a great human being as well. I know his story because I was there for a lot of the steps along the way, and he's one of those guys that I am just thrilled for the success that he's had because he's a self-made guy. That's former Ute guard and current Cleveland Cavaliers associate head coach Johnnie Bryant. He'll join us next on the Crimson Corner.
Here's another insider interview on the Crimson Corner podcast.
Crimson Corner podcast, special guest today, an old friend. Not too old. He's not as old as me, but he's getting up there, man. He's a former Ute. He's a great, you guys know him. You love him from his days at Utah. Coached for years with the Jazz, and now we're going to catch up with Cleveland Cavaliers associate head coach Johnnie Bryant on the Crimson Corner. It has been way too long, my friend. How are you?
I'm well, man. Good to see you. Good to hear from you. I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been, like you said, way too long.
Well, let's catch up just a little bit. I know a lot of fans remember you from your days, obviously, here, and you spent a good deal of time with the Jazz, but you haven't been around for the last couple of years. What you been up to?
Yeah. So COVID, once COVID hit in 2020, I left Utah and went to New York. Was with the Knicks for 4 years and was a part of a great turnaround there. We went to the playoffs 3 out of 4 years there. My last year there, we finished number 2 seed in the East, and made it to the semifinals when I was there. So, and then I was there for 4 years, and now I'm in my second year here in Cleveland. Last year was an unbelievable experience, personally, professionally. Winning 60 plus games, coaching NBA All Star game back in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was home for me. So it's been great. It's been great being here in Cleveland and getting exposed to another organization, working for a great coach in Kenny. And I'm just enjoying my time. I can't believe it's been 14 seasons of me coaching in the NBA.
That's crazy. I mean, it's really crazy about how time flies. You and I, before you came on, we're talking about kids, and they're the ones that really age you. That's how, sometimes the career and life flies by, but then you look at your kids, but sometimes it's other people's kids. And that really makes time go, where did it happen, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and whenever you meet someone, child or kids, right? It's if they're 5 years old when you meet them, they're always 5 years old in their mind, right? And my mentor, Lou Ritchie, I met his kids there, when they were 6 years old. So in my mind, I still think they're six, and they're 30 years old, and same thing for your kids. So time flies, and when you're around kids, they keep you young. So I'm fortunate. I have two beautiful kids. My daughter's 11, and my son's he'll be 8. He'll be 8 in April. So, it's one of those things where they keep me young. They keep me up to date with all the lingo, terminology, slang, whatever you want to call it. So it's been fun. It's been fun.
Yeah, I told Johnny before we went on, my son's now almost 26 years old, and
That's
he couldn't believe it because Johnny, in his other life, caught basketball and skills and all that stuff. And my son Billy, when he was about 8 or 9 years old, went to see Johnny, which was, I don't know, 18 years ago.
Yeah, it was.
Time flies, Johnny.
Man, it's wild, man. That time, when I was doing Bryant Sports Academy, it was something where I just wanted to kind of give back to the youth and coach basketball. Really, frankly, I did not want to coach. I just, everybody's like, you'll be a good coach. And it actually started with Parker Van Dyke and his brother. After my senior year, before I went to go play in Germany, I started training him on the side. And then when I came back from Germany, reached out to Parker and his family and said, hey, I'm going to start training kids. And, just kind of on the side. And it kind of took a life of its own and started training a bunch of kids there. And then it started with Sean Green, and then, Nick Jacobson and, Chris Burgess and, just different people that were back in Salt Lake. And, then it led to, Ronnie Price and Paul Millsap, and did that for 3 years and ended up coaching for the Jazz after the third year. So it just kind of snowballed. And, you mentioned coaching basketball. A lot of the stuff that I was teaching, to Billy and to kids, then it's the same thing. Basketball is basketball. The fundamentals are the fundamentals. So, I like to say, I'm just a student and teacher of the game of basketball.
Well, just to give you guys a little background, Johnnie Bryant Sports Academy started at Lutheran, I think it was Lutheran High School on 9th East between 33rd and 39th.
Salt Lake Lutheran. Yep.
And you would walk in that gym, and Johnny would be teaching a bunch of 3rd and 4th graders, boys and girls basketball. That session would wrap up, and then Paul Millsap and Ronnie Price might come walking in the gym. A couple of guys that were playing pro basketball, or as you mentioned, Chris Burgess, who was playing overseas. Yeah. You had everybody. You had little kids all the way up to pros. That was a diverse bunch of people you were coaching. But coach, like you said, coaching's coaching.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have the trust of the pros and then the parents like yourself, right? And looking back, I didn't know what I was doing. I knew how to, push players and get them better, but I was learning on the fly, right? I'm running a business. I'm fresh out of college, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do in life. And you know, those 3 years for me really taught me a lot, right? Because it taught me how to deal with NBA players, but then it also taught me how to deal with kids and really how to teach and how to break it down to where um, you can communicate to any player, any level, boy, girl, um, and that was really the biggest takeaway that I took from it was being able to teach, no matter who was in the gym. And, I always said, it was days where only one kid would come and I was like, oh man, and you're thinking, business wise, like, hey, I got to rent this gym and do all these things. But um, me and my good friend, I just said, look, no matter if this is successful or not, if I have one person in the gym, it's an audience, right? It's an audience, and I'm gonna, teach as if I'm having, 100 people in the gym, and here I am today coaching in the NBA.
It's a crazy, wild journey. There's no doubt about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. By the way, what was it like? 2012. You've been doing it for 3 years, and the Utah Jazz call you and say, "Hey, we'd like to offer you a position."
So it's interesting because I was working out Paul at the practice facility, and I used to work them out early in the morning, and then I would go teach classes at the University of Utah. I taught the basketball class at the University of Utah as a credit, non-credit course. So class started at, I believe, like at 11. And by the time I got done with Paul, I was like 10. So I work him out. And while I'm working him out, I see I'm working out him and Elijah, his brother. And I see this gentleman like walk in and he had on a collared shirt, some khaki pants, and he's on the bike just kind of like pedaling. So, I don't think anything of it. Then Marvin Williams comes in. He's working on the other side. Then a really good friend of mine, he was in the gym as well. He was actually in the agent business. He was really good friends with CJ Miles at the time. So in my mind, I'm just being me. I'm working. So um, my friend Adrian, he goes, "Hey, Marvin wants to know who you were." And Marvin and I, we had a mutual friend. His college roommate was a really good friend of mine from home in Oakland. That they won the national championship together. So I'm trying to rush to get to class, and I was like, "Well, let me just go in there and just introduce myself to Marv." So I introduced myself to Marv, and we kind of talked for a couple minutes, and then I go in the weight room, and that same gentleman that was there on the bike, he's in the weight room on elliptical. So I walk in, and a couple weeks before, Jim Boylan, he called me and said, "Hey, my real good friend just got the GM job, Dennis Lindsay, and if you ever see him, just go introduce yourself to him." So I go and I figured it was him, but I wasn't sure. I didn't know what he looked like. I just went in, "Hey, my name is Johnnie Bryant. Nice to meet you." He introduced himself. I said, "Yeah, Coach Borland told me to introduce myself." And I was like, "Hey, I'll just love to come watch practice. Just come watch and learn, from you guys and so forth." So he gave me his phone number, and he had like three different phone numbers. He had the business number, and then he had his number from Texas. So I pull out the parking lot, and I text him, and he didn't respond. And I was like, okay, or maybe I texted the wrong one. And then on Thursday, I text him again. And then Friday, he texts back. And that Saturday, it was actually BYU football versus Utah. And Ty Corbin called me and said, "Hey, um, come in on Monday. Want to run something by you, something that you may be interested in." And, that's how it happened, man. And I went in there, spoke with Ty, and it was supposed to be a 1 year deal, and next thing I ended up having 8 years there in Utah coaching. So, I tell that story often, especially to young aspiring coaches, because you never know who's watching you, right? Like I just was in there working, and I just went in there and introduced myself, and one thing led to another, and I'm forever grateful for Dennis Lindsay giving me an opportunity and trusting me with that opportunity, and it's something I'll never forget.
Much like you, I teach a class at the University of Utah, although not basketball. I teach a communications and media class, but I tell them the same thing. I've told my kids and everybody else. I firmly believe this, Johnny. Hard work is always realized and recognized and oftentimes rewarded too. It just may not be
Yeah.
on your timeline. It may not be when you
Yeah.
expect it, but somebody's always watching. I tell people all the time, somebody's always watching. And if you're working hard, somebody's going to say, I want that guy working with me. And you're clearly a great example of that. I've benefited with that over my years too, and as a broadcaster.
Yeah, no, and that's true, right? To break it down to that, that nuance into that, specific just example of like you just never know who's watching you, right? And that's why it's so important, no matter where you are, just be yourself, right? Be yourself, because you have the wrong interaction with the wrong person, you never know how it turns out, right? My senior year at the U, Boylan decided to bring me off the bench, and obviously I was upset about it early. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to embrace the role. Now, if I would have handled that situation differently, does Boylan give the recommendation to Dennis, like, hey, this is a good kid, give him opportunity, right? So you just never know how the dots are connected. And like I said, I was raised right, my mom, my mentors back home, and that's just something that I just carry with me daily.
I never asked you, how did you get to Utah? You're at San Francisco City. You grew up in Oakland. You go to San Francisco City. How do you end up at
Yeah.
Utah?
Ray Giacoletti, he was the head coach at Eastern Washington. He recruited my two guard from City College, Jamal Holden, um, to go to Eastern Washington. And then another wing player, um, Kenneth Smith, he was from Oakland. He was playing down at Tyler Junior College. Um, he's like a brother to me. And he recruited both of them. So Coach Jack knew my mentor Raymond Young because Deuce and I, Kenneth Smith, Deuce and I, we have the same circle, right? Growing up in Oakland. So when Coach Jack started recruiting Jamal, he seen me play, then the dots connected, like, hey, like that's one of your kids too. He's like, yeah. So when Coach Jack got the job at Utah, he literally flew in. He said, look, I don't need to see you play. I seen you play enough. I'm offering you a scholarship. And I looked at him like, and like my eyes lit up, because, in junior college, you want to get a scholarship. So um, that's how it happened. And then my academic advisor was really good friends with Marty Wilson. So, for me, it was just one of those things like no matter what school came in, everything kind of aligned. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to Utah. And at the time, that's when the ESPN Big Monday games were. So I'm like, look, I get to play on TV. My family get to see me. I walked into Huntsman, 15,000 seat arena. Like, as a kid, it's like, this is what it's about. So that's how I ended up at the University of Utah.
Favorite memory from your time here? You guys didn't have a ton of on-court success the way other teams may have, but you had a really good couple of year run, JB. Is there a favorite moment, favorite memory, favorite time you were here?
Um, so I just was in Denver, Colorado, and every time I go to Denver, my really good friend Matt McCraw, he comes to the game with his family, and he played at Air Force at the time, and um, so we play Air Force. They're 11th in the country,
They were
and
running that crazy Princeton offense.
they're rolling. Birchie, they had Matt McCraw. Uh, you know, they had a really good team. So Matt calls me, say, "Hey, we're in town. We're staying at the Marriott downtown." I'm like, "All right, cool. I'm gonna come see you guys." So we go down there. I go down there and we're playing dominoes. I love dominoes. Like dominoes, my my favorite pastime. So go down there playing dominoes, and every time they would score, or he would score, they would say pop, like, 10 points or 5 points or whatever it is. So like, we're down there talking, crazy to each other. So the next night we have to play Air Force at the Huntsman. So we're playing and, game kind of close. And the very first three I hit in front of their bench. And I said, pop so loud, just pop. And we ended up beating them. And if there's a picture on the internet, I had the ball at the end of at the end of the regulation. I just threw it up to the cloud. Obviously, the cloud's not there anymore where the scoreboard was. And I still talk to Matt about that to this day. And I said, look, we were the team. We weren't good. We were not that good that year, but we sent you guys to the NIT because they end up like losing a couple games down the stretch. They went to the NIT. I can't believe. I think they went to the semifinals, or I can't believe what happened. I don't remember what happened, but we talk about that. And then when we went to Clune Arena, like a couple weeks later, they got us by like 30. It was a snow blizzard and everything. So that's definitely a good memory for sure. But overall memories just with my teammates, man. Honestly, Sean and LB and I, we have a couple memories that we can't disclose just being college kids, but my time at Utah was great. And I will share a memory with LB and I. We're walking back from the HC to our dorms, and it's summertime. We're working out and we look up, and the there's still snow like on the mountains, and we're like, I'm from Oakland, you from New York, like this is crazy. Like, so we literally walking, looking at the mountains, like, man, this is wild. So we still laugh about that to this day. But man, Utah, Salt Lake City will forever be a special place to me. Because at the end of the day, I spent so much time there from 2004 to 2020. I became a man in that city. So I'm forever grateful for my time there.
Keeping an eye on your old alma mater with your friend and former cohort and coaching, Alex Jensen. You guys spent a lot of time together with the Utah
Yeah.
Jazz. You keeping an eye on what Al's doing here this year?
Absolutely. I still have the alerts on my phone. Start of the game, halftime, and the end of the game. Even the same thing for football too. And if I get a chance, if the game is on TV, I'll take a look at it. I'm not going to sit up here and say I watch every game, but if they're playing on TV, I'm definitely taking a look at it. I may watch 15, 20 minutes, and then I had to kind of get back to my real job, but football season, I'm definitely watching those games, because I love watching college football. There's nothing like it. But no, I'm watching, supporting as much as I can. And Alex, he's gonna do a good job up there.
What do you love about coaching in the NBA? Because you've spent most of your career in the NBA. I think you just said earlier 14 years, Jazz, Knicks, and now Cavaliers. Well, what do you love about coaching in the NBA, JB?
The thing I really love is the challenge of getting these guys better, right? Because you assume they're in the NBA, they know everything, but it's how can you maximize a player? How can you get them better? And you know, when you have all stars, all NBA players coming to you for advice, like that, they're making you better. It's one of those things where Quinn Snyder used to say this all the time, like players make coaches better. You know what I mean? Like, because in the heat of the moment, when, a Donovan Mitchell come to you and say, hey, what do you see? Or Julius Randle come to you and say, what do you see? You have to have an answer because in their mind, they're looking for solutions. So you have to have solutions for them. And, for me, I love that. I love being able to work with a player and, all of a sudden they apply it to the game. There's several situations um, where I work with a player on something, the next, they do it in the game, and then they're pointing to you on the sideline, or players leave and they do something, and they sit up and tell you, yeah, we worked on that. So those moments are great. That's the biggest challenge is getting those guys better, and I love that. That's what keeps me going. But really, at the end of the day, being able to help them accomplish their goals and impact their lives in a positive way, but allow them to take care of their family for the rest of their lives. That's when you see a guy get a extension for 100, $200 million, like, and to be a part of that journey, like that's pretty cool to see.
You ever catch yourself? I mean, you've been doing this for 14 years. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Sometimes I catch myself. I'm at a big game, football stadium, arena. We were just at Allen Fieldhouse last weekend. You just kind of stop and look around. You ever catch yourself thinking, this kid from Oakland is coaching the biggest stars in the biggest league in the world? Look how far I've come.
Oh man, that happens all the time. Certain big games. Um, you know, I mean, everybody asks me what's my most memorable experience in the NBA. Simple. Kobe 60 on the way out, right? Um, then I had the opportunity to go work with him and Gordon that summer. But you for me, I don't take it for granted. I really, during the national anthem, I'll sit there and just kind of look around like, wow, like this is crazy. Even last year coaching the All-Star game back at home, the team that we had was LeBron, Steph, James, Dame, Jason Tatum, Kyrie. You know what I mean? And I have the picture, and it's one of those things. Like, wow, like I've been very blessed and fortunate to, um, you know, be around the game's best players. Like now James Harden's on the team, top 75 player. My relationship that I have with Dame Lillard, top 75 player, right? Like, so, Coach Derrick Rose, youngest MVP ever. You know what I mean? So it's you sit up there and you're just like, wow, this is crazy to witness, and I don't take it for granted. I definitely appreciate it, and it's my story's still being written. So we'll see how it ends. On the when I get done coaching, I don't know when that will be though.
Well, you got a lot more gears left. There's no doubt
Yep.
about that. And I will say this, because I've known Johnnie Bryant since the day he stepped on campus here at the University of Utah. And I don't say this about everybody. There's a handful of guys. I say the same thing about Eric Weddle, though, too. He is the same genuine good dude today that he was when he stepped on campus. What was that 2004, 2005 season
Yeah.
when you were here? It's a lot. We won't go back. We won't count the years, but I'm happy that we've been able to maintain our friendship down through the years, JB. So
No, I appreciate
I'm really
that.
happy with all your success and all you've done.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the kind words, man. And, it goes back to my foundation, right? Just the way I was raised from my parents and my mentors and just treating people with respect, right? And I've been through a lot of adversity in life where, for me, I'm never too high, never too low. And, I experienced a lot of, adversity young, and I had to grow up early. And I think people can look at it like, oh, well, you grew up here and you had to go through this as a bad thing. But, sometimes you look at it and it's like, it was good because now I had to figure things out. I'm walking to school in the fourth grade and, washing clothes. My mom worked graveyard from 6 in the afternoon to 6 in the morning. And me and my brother and my sister, we're at home trying to figure it out. And then once my um, brother and sister move out the house, I'm there by myself, right? So all those life experiences shape and make you who you are, and I'm very grateful for those experiences because I think it served me well.
Well, thank you for doing this. It's great to catch up. Hopefully we can catch up in the off season or the next time you're back in SLC. Enjoy the All-Star break because you get a few days away. Go see those kids of yours, and good luck to the Cavaliers in the second stretch half of the season.
Thank you, appreciate you for having me. A good talking to you. And I'm always here. Reach out anytime. Tell the young fella I said hello, please.
He's not so young anymore, but I will tell him.
Yeah, but he's still young to me though. So, he's still that 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid when I first met him, or however old he was. I appreciate you, and we'll be out there sometimes. I think in March. Hopefully, we can connect. If not, I'm one phone call away.
Johnnie Bryant with us here on Crimson Corner.
The best insight on all things Utah athletics. It's the Crimson Corner Podcast.
Big thank you to Johnnie Bryant for taking some time on an off day in the NBA. He traveled back from Denver, had an off day, and was kind enough to take a few minutes out of his day to talk to me. The NBA schedule, as many of you may know, it's a crazy travel, lots of game schedule, but they are coming up on the All-Star break. So I really appreciate Johnny taking some time from Cleveland to catch up. And again, he's just one of those guys that I could not be happier for his success because I'm, again, being as old as I am, seasoned, if you will, I covered Johnny when he was a player, playing for Ray Giacoletti and Jim Boylan. He was always a great dude then, and I just love his story, which you guys heard, being a self-made guy and just working. He didn't expect anything. He just worked. And it's a good lesson. I try to teach my kids this. I try to teach the kids that take my journalism class at the University of Utah. I try to tell people this all the time. Hard work is always rewarded. Now, it may not be rewarded on your time frame or your timeline or exactly when you want it. But I always know that when you work hard and you bust your butt and you do a good job, somebody's going to take notice. Somebody's going to see that and say, I want that guy, I want that girl working for me. And that's exactly what happened with Johnnie Bryant and the Jazz. And then you've seen his NBA career take off. Couldn't be happier for him and everything he's done. All right, speaking of basketball, the running Utes. Yeah, it's tough season right now for Alex's guys. They're 9-14 and 1-9 in the Big 12 at this time as of taping of this pod. They've got Houston coming in on Tuesday night and then a tough back-to-back road trip. Not the opponents so much, though they're not bad, but it's the travel. They've got to play at Cincinnati on Sunday and at West Virginia on Wednesday. That's a long road trip. And the Utes haven't won a road game since last January. They've got 14 straight conference or just road losses right now. This season right now is continuing to be about building the culture and instilling the philosophy that Alex Jensen wants his program to represent. They're working on, we were talking about roster construction earlier in the pod today on the football side of it with Joe DeRazio. Well, they're doing that right now on the basketball side. They're evaluating their current roster. And General Manager Wes Wilcox is looking at potential talent everywhere for next season. That's why you hire a general manager, so the coach can coach, so he can focus on the here and the now. And you hire personnel folks and you hire a general manager to find talent that fits what you want to do. They got a late start last spring, but Wes now has a full run-up to the next season, and that's what he's doing. And that's what Utah basketball is about right now. I would say this. At this point in time, nobody in college basketball, Utah or anybody else, has any idea who's going to be on their roster next year. That's just the nature of where we are. But I will say this. There is one player in particular that I would love to see back next year for Utah basketball. His name is Kendall Sanders. He's a freshman. He was a guy that when Utah signed him last spring and into the summer, they didn't even expect to play Kendall this year, very much, if at all. It was going to be a redshirt year for Kendall Sanders. He was a kid that grew up in Southern California. His dad was a college basketball player. I think he played at Western Michigan, and then he played at USC. Played with Harold Miner, if you remember, Baby Jordan, back in the late 90s or early 90s. And then he went to IMG Academy and played at IMG Academy against some pretty high-level basketball players. Kendall came in expecting the redshirt this year. Well, be ready to play, young man, because you never know what's going to happen. They had some injuries. They needed him on there, and he has played. And he has played for a guy that's a true freshman pretty solidly this year. He's young. He's tough. He's smart. Physically and game-wise, he's what a program in the Big 12 needs. And again, he's not been a star player this year, but he's shown you enough to know this kid's got a bright future. And I think he's a nice fit for everything Alex and his staff are trying to do. So I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows. And nobody knows at Kansas or at Duke or at Washington or at Weber State, because the nature of where we are now means rosters turn over. But one player I would love to see come back and be part of this core moving forward is Kendall Sanders, because we've seen him grow nicely as a young kid. Sometimes freshmen hit a wall. Sometimes they regress a little bit. I think Kendall has just progressed nicely on a nice path for a true freshman. So we'll see if he can come back next year, and we'll be anxious to see what the roster construction looks like once the season ends. All right, let me get a couple of questions or comments in from some listeners. Again, I've asked you guys to drop me an email. If you listen to this, you have something you want me to talk about or to have a guest on or a comment you want to make, feel free to do so. Shoot me an email, briley@huntsman.utah.edu. That's briley@huntsman.utah.edu. David Alvey sends this in, says, "Hey, Bill, heard you the other day on the drive with Spence Checkets. talking about your show and your podcast. Just thought about guests. It's always fun to hear guys from back in the day, mid-'60s and '70s. Guys like Mike Sojourner or Tyrone Medley or Mike Newland for basketball, Steve Odom, Del Rogers for football, as well as recent athletes. The older guys could tell some great stories. Plus, at some point, they won't be here with us anymore. So get them on while you can. David, good idea, and I'll do that. We've got a lot of time to fill from like May through August when we don't have any games or sports going on. So I'll try and do that. We'll try and get some of the old heads on to tell some stories from back in the day and see how they connect with Utah football or basketball or baseball or gymnastics today. So thank you for that email. Ira Bowman writes in, says, Bill, I love the Crimson Corner and I love the way you cover the Utes, but I've got a career question for you. How'd you go about building relationships with all the Utah coaches when you became the voice of the Utes? Thanks for your time. You're an inspiration to young broadcasters like me across Utah. Well, thank you very much, Ira. I appreciate that. It's just time, really. It's just showing up on a regular basis. It's just being around and covering their teams and being at press conferences and practices and things like that, because it's just like anything in life. The more people get to know you, who you are, and the more they see you around, the more they begin to feel more comfortable around you. And the more they see the work that you do covering them, whether it's an interview or a podcast or a broadcast or a feature, whatever that might happen to be, the more they trust the work that you do as well. So, for me, it was easy because I cover the Utes for my job, and I'm around football, and I'm around basketball. But I'm not around baseball as much, though I am now that I work full-time in the department. Or I wasn't necessarily around women's basketball or volleyball or softball. So that's where you take the time to get to know the coaches. And maybe, you go up and you do an interview with a player that maybe you wouldn't necessarily do. And that then gets you there and in kind of that, that's that guy. And then the more you're there, then they know your name. Then they know who you are. And the more work you do, the more they get to know you. So it's really just about showing up on a daily basis and being present and doing good work. So whether you're covering high schools or colleges or pros, the more they see your face, the more they see you and the more they trust you. So thank you for that comment. Appreciate it. And again, you guys get your comments coming in, questions coming in, suggestions for the podcast. Nick and I like to hear those things, so send them in to us. briley@huntsman.utah.edu. One quick note on the way out today. There's a really cool event coming up at the Huntsman Center on Saturday late afternoon, early evening. University of Utah and Utah Athletics is honoring one of the great names in Utah women's basketball and Utah Athletics history Saturday at the Huntsman Center. It's Elaine Elliott Legacy and Banner Night. The great and winningest head coach in University of Utah women's basketball history, and somebody that I've known for a long time, but again, now I've gotten to know her a lot more because she's working with me. She's our color analyst for our women's basketball broadcasts on ESPN+. She's going to be honored at halftime of the game on Saturday. And she is one of the all-time great names in Utah women's basketball, but really women's basketball in the Western United States. And Elaine's going to get a banner hung in the rafters at the Huntsman Center, much the same way Rick Majerus has his banner up there. Elaine's going to have her banner up there as well. She'll be hanging up there with some of the great men's and women's basketball names in Utah basketball history. It won't be a sweater, I don't think, though. Rick's kind of got that sweater hanging up there. They're just going to put a banner up there with Elaine on there, and it's going to be fantastic. A lot of her former players and coaches and coaching staff folks will be there. It's Saturday at halftime of the women's basketball game. So if you get a chance, the men are on the road this coming weekend. And the women are playing good basketball. So if you get a chance, buy some tickets. Go to utahtickets.com. And if you go to that game, stick around. Don't go to the restroom or don't go to the concession stand at halftime. But be there to honor it. We've done a lot of great work in advance. There's going to be a lot of great stuff coming up on social media this week. But if you get a chance, head out and honor one of the great names in Utah women's basketball history, Elaine Elliott, coming up on Saturday. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Crimson Corner. Thank you, as always, to Nick Bowlerjack for producing things. Thank you to Johnnie Bryant, my friend and former Ute and current Cleveland Cavalier associate head coach. We'll be back next week with another edition of Crimson Corner. Thanks again to our friends at Advanced Window Products for sponsoring Crimson Corner. For the entire crew here, I'm Bill Riley. Say so long and talk to you next week on the Crimson Corner. Go Utes.
You've been listening to the Crimson Corner podcast with Bill Riley. Bill is back next week with the latest on Utes. Download previous Crimson Corner episodes on all major podcast platforms.